Welcome to the channel, Scoundrels. I hope you're all doing well. Welcome back to the Scoundrels Den. Today we're going to be looking at, I'm going to take my headphones off because I don't even need them. Today we're going to be looking at some of the balance changes that happened in Wild Rift yesterday on the 9th of November. And I thought it'd be no better time to integrate that with a tier list because I'm going to update my tier list following these balance changes. 3 champions essentially got nerfed. We'll go through those changes and how they impact our tier lists later on. But for now, if you'd like to join the Scoundrel Gang, there is a subscription button down below, and thanks to G2A for sponsoring the channel. So, let's go through the changes. Blitzcrank actually got a pretty significant nerf. He had a 40 health nerf. He's had his health regen per level cut by about 20%. He's had a 50 damage nerf to his ultimate, that area of effect silence, and the silence has been cut in half to 0.5 seconds. So, okay, this is quite clearly some major nerfs to Blitzcrank, but what I would say about that is that Blitzcrank is still one of the few supports that can punish Enchanter supports. So when I mean Enchanter supports, I mean Seraphine, Sona, Lux. These supports naturally have very low HP. Blitzcrank's hook gives you the ability to engage on them if you can land it, and that's why I still think Blitzcrank is going to remain a very powerful support in the meta. Plus, with the nature of Wild Rift, getting a single pick can be really influential, and I think that's going to make Blitzcrank still remain a very, very strong pick overall. So even though the nerfs are warranted, I don't think it affects Blitzcrank's position in the meta a huge amount. I still think he's going to be a very, 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 very good pick, and I still expect to see him a lot in bot lane or in dragon lane. Vayne, she has had a movement speed nerf, so 5 movement speed on her base movement speed, and then she's had a movement speed nerf to the bonuses that her ultimate Night Hunter gives her. It's cut in half at level 1 and only scales up to its original value at level 3. Or level 9 or whatever you want to say. So yeah, you get lower movement speed from her initial ultimate levels. And she's also had true damage nerf to her Silver Bolt. She was doing a lot of true damage, and that was very difficult to play against in solo lanes. You saw quite a lot of Vayne top lanes or Vayne Baron lanes being used, and that's going to this is going to impact her a decent amount. And it's obviously as such also going to nerf her performance in the dragon lane as well. So Xin Zhao, he's the major change here, and actually Xin Zhao was quite clearly one of the more powerful jungle picks in the meta. I'd say that in almost every high elo game there was Xin Zhao, because obviously you can't ban right now. He's getting a 6 attack damage nerf, which is just over 10%. Just under 10%. He's having a health per level nerf of 10, armor per level nerf, magic resist is being reduced. His audacious charge range, which is his charge ability or his third ability, that's getting nerfed. And his Crescent Guard, which is his ultimate, his cooldown's getting nerfed as well. So he's going to be a higher cooldown at every level too. So this is actually pretty impactful for Xin Zhao. I still think Xin Zhao will be good, probably not absolute S tier. I still don't think Xin Zhao is going to be awful. I do think he'll still remain a pretty good champion. The very nature of the fact is that even with these base stat nerfs, he's still quite a powerful engager, and he's quite easy to play. So I still think we'll see a decent amount of Xin Zhao, but this probably reduces him from absolute S tier to maybe A tier or S/A tier. It's in between the two. But I do think this is going to mean that Xin Zhao is not going to mean that Xin Zhao doesn't get picked whatsoever. I still think Xin Zhao will probably get picked. And fixed an issue where bots were significantly overperforming in practice mode. Did not realize that, but apparently bots are significantly overperforming in practice mode. So some very basic changes. Notice that Ezreal has not been changed. I think Ezreal is a pretty tough nut to crack right now. It's quite difficult to know how to approach him. But as such, let's get on to our tier list. We'll start off where we always start, in the mid lane. Okay, so speaking of the changes, we're now going to look at the tier list, and we'll start with the mid lane. And again, queen of the mid lane still remains to be Orianna. She's played in a lot of mid lane high elo games, seen her pretty much every game, but she's joined by Ahri. Ahri and Orianna seem to be the go-to mid lane mages right now. Some changes to A tier. I've moved Lux into A tier because she is seeing quite a bit of play. However, I've kept Twisted Fate, Zed, and Yasuo all in A tier as well, especially Zed. Zed could be S tier. I'm a little bit wary about where he is. I would really put him between S and A tier. He is played quite a lot in high elo. Yasuo could be S tier in the right hands, but he's probably the hardest mid laner to play on this entire list, and that makes him quite a difficult person to pilot for sort of like the average player. So I don't want to put Yasuo in S tier and see everybody pick Yasuo and then end up doing really badly with him, because he's a very difficult champion to play on Wild Rift. Other changes that you might notice, I've moved Gragas down from S tier to B tier. That mid lane Gragas seemed to be like a little flash in the pan. We don't see much of it anymore. Mostly seeing AP Gragas quite prevalently in top lane and a little bit in the jungle. Akali has moved down to B tier. I'm not seeing much Akali at all. I think she's just outclassed by other assassins right now, like Zed, for instance. So that's probably why we're not seeing a huge amount of Akali. Also, I have heard that you can auto-aim skill shots to her when she's in Shroud, and that might make Akali's Shroud a little bit less useful. The other thing that I've done is I've moved Ziggs down to C tier. Ziggs is like the worst mage in the game, not even joking. He feels really clunky to play. It's very difficult to combo his skills together. His ultimate feels like it's got a really short range. I honestly just don't think Ziggs is that good at all. He's just got some tower taking potential, which is nice, but Ziggs just doesn't feel great to play right now. So that's why I put Ziggs down in C tier. Okay, that is the mid lane list, and let's have a look at our next tier list. Okay, we're going to move over to the Baron lane, or the solo lane, and we can have a look at some of the carries that we're seeing in that side of the map. And I want to focus on the fact that we have made some changes here, but no changes to S tier. Garen still remains really good. Camille still remains really good. We're still seeing a lot of Olaf. Garen, people might question Garen, but he's such a lane bully. Like, it's really difficult to play against Garen because he's such a lane bully, and that can be quite difficult to play into for a lot of solo laners. Gragas, AP Gragas in A tier, Jax, Fiora, and Malphite in A tier, but you will notice that I've moved a lot of things from A tier downwards. Notably, Akali, again, she's not being played a huge amount right now, so I couldn't feasibly put her in A tier. I've also removed some picks that would likely go to the jungle from the list. I've also moved Nasus down to B tier. The reason I moved Nasus down to B tier is he's quite easy to beat up in lane early on. Nasus really sucks in the first 5 minutes of the game. And a lot of the laners above him, so a lot of the people like Olaf, Camille, Garen, they can beat Nasus easily in lane. And so Nasus takes a little bit too long to scale up. Some of the other changes, Vayne has been included in the list. She's still viable top lane, but just not as good as she once was. We've put Jarvan, Yasuo, Lee Sin top. I've seen a lot of Lee Sin top. The reason Lee Sin top works on Wild Rift when he didn't really work on PC is that you can use your safeguard to any location without a ward. So you can use your second ability, your safeguard ability, as a dash to any location. So he has a free escape without the need to jump to a minion or a ward or an allied champion. And that makes him a little bit more viable as a laner. And I've also included Zed, because Zed is being seen in the top lane a little bit, but I've removed things like Shyvana and Master Yi because they are mostly seen in the jungle. But no major changes, we've just moved a couple of things down, but the S tier and the A tier picks remain relatively the same. So that's the solo lane Baron picks so far. Let's move on to our AD carry list. So it may come as absolutely no surprise that there is someone that stays at the top of the AD carry tier list, given that he had absolutely no nerfs, and that is Ezreal. Ezreal is very, very strong, and he will remain to be very strong until they figure out a way to deal with his damage output. So Ezreal remains at S tier. The only major changes are that we've moved Misfortune up to A tier. Misfortune actually is a lot stronger than I previously thought. She's very good at, she's a basic attack focused AD carry with some casting in her kit. And she actually has a lot of damage output. So Misfortune is a pretty strong AD carry, especially when paired up with the likes of Blitzcrank. So Misfortune has been moved up a tier, but relatively speaking, everything else remains the same. Ashe and Kai'Sa really are the go-tos after Ezreal. Then Jinx, Jhin, and Misfortune are all there. Vayne with her nerfs alongside Varus in B tier. And I have included Twisted Fate because I've seen some Twisted Fate be played bot. And not as AD, but as AP. And I've also included Ziggs because I've seen some Ziggs get played bot. Again, Ziggs feels quite clunky, but what I would say about Ziggs is when you pair him with a support, he functions a bit better. He's also pretty good at shoving lanes in, and that's kind of what you can do in the side lane. But still, don't think Ziggs is as good as any of the traditional AD carries, but again, Ezreal still remains the absolute S tier pick in the AD carry role. Now this one might strike some people as controversial given the nerfs, but I'm keeping Blitzcrank in S tier. And the reason I'm keeping Blitzcrank in S tier is there are actually very few supports that counter Blitzcrank in the meta, the only one being Alistair, and one could say to an extent Braum. Every other support in the meta is technically weak to Blitzcrank, because enchanters are weak to Blitzcrank overall. He's good against Sona, he's good against Seraphine, he's good against Lux, Janna. Any of these supports that if you land a hook on, they're going to die. Those are the kind of supports that Blitzcrank thrives against. And that's why, despite the nerfs, I'm still expecting Blitzcrank to remain a very high tier pick. Plus the fact that like a single pick in Wild Rift is very strong and very influential in terms of, you know, deciding outcomes on neutral objectives and on the game. So that's some of the major changes. The other thing is I've trimmed down the A tier pool. The supports that you generally tend to see played following Blitzcrank are Janna, Alistair, and Seraphine. Following that, it's things like Braum, Sona, Nami, and Lux. And then sometimes you'll see Soraka and even Malphite. And then again, very, very occasionally, you'll see an Annie. But overall, I would say the two most common picks that I see in high elo match histories are Janna and Blitzcrank, and then very closely followed by Alistair. And then Seraphine has also made her way into a pretty strong position in the support role. But overall, I still imagine Blitzcrank to remain almost certainly the top tier pick, just because he kind of counters the majority of the supports in the meta. Once we get things like Leona and some extra tanky engage supports, that's where Blitzcrank will start to suffer. But he's just so good against most of the enchanter supports in the meta, just because of the way his kit operates, that I still imagine Blitzcrank to be good despite the nerfs. Alright, moving finally onto the jungle, and again, this is probably where you're going to see most of the shift, just because of the heavy nerf to Xin Zhao. Yes, Xin Zhao unfortunately has not made it to the S tier role. The reason being, the nerfs were too heavy to Xin Zhao. I think they are going to negatively affect the way that he manages to play the game out. It really eliminates a lot of his early clear speed. It eliminates a lot of his dueling potential. And so I think Xin Zhao is going to take a bit of a hit here. And the jungler that I've seen kind of supersede Xin Zhao is Shyvana. Shyvana has really stepped up. She's a very quick clear speed jungler. She's good at trading and dueling. She's got decent engage with her ultimate. She's not as good setup as Xin Zhao, and she's not as immortal as Xin Zhao was with his ultimate. But she is still a really, really strong jungler in that sense. And I think also Lee Sin still remains an incredibly good jungler in the current meta. The A tier picks, they haven't changed a huge amount. The only things that you're going to notice, I've moved Jarvan and I've moved Evelynn up. Evelyn's a great AP assassin that can snowball really quickly. Jarvan's got great engage and lockdown potential. I've moved Master Yi down to B tier, and the reason being is Master Yi sucks early game, a little bit like Nasus. He's a bit of a noob stomper. If you're in low elo, Master Yi is going to be a decent jungler to consider, but honestly, for the most part, he's a bit of a noob stomper. No major changes to B tier otherwise. Graves and Jax are still very good. The reason Graves isn't any higher is just because he's a little bit slower than his PC counterpart in terms of clear speed. He can't quite hyper farm the same level, and he doesn't. I don't think he has as much impact on the game as some of the other junglers. Other than that, I played Amumu the other day, and Amumu is actually, I think, relatively strong. I think once people start to play Amumu more, they might start to figure out that he's actually pretty decent. So I think Amumu's probably a pretty solid pick to consider for the future. I've added some other random junglers that I've seen played, the likes of Tryndamere and Fizz, but they're not particularly good. I've also seen a bit of Malphite jungle here and there, but again, not horrendously good. And Nasus has been played in the jungle, but also slow clear speed, doesn't stack particularly quickly. Ganks really rely on Wither alone. It's not the best jungler to play. But Shyvana and Lee Sin seem to be dominating the jungle meta, closely followed by, Xin Zhao still being played, Gragas, Olaf, and the likes that you see in the rest of the tier list. So that is the tier list wrapped up, as well as some patch note breakdowns. I hope you enjoyed today. If you enjoyed the content, feel free to subscribe. It would mean a lot, and I'll see you soon.